Okay. Good evening, everyone. Still morning my time. It's nice to see. Thank you so much for coming by to hear about a topic in the admission process that I think is extremely important. I've been lucky enough for my entire career to always work at test optional admission colleges and universities. Even the policy, I think it gives students the correct flexibility to be able to present themselves the best way in the application process. So I appreciate you coming by. I hope the presentation's helpful. We have a few minutes for, and we hope we have a few minutes for questions at the end of it. So my name is Aiden Beck. I am the Associate Director of International Admission at Bryant University, and I hope you enjoy the topic today. So much of, sorry, one second. Much of, I think there's a lot of confusion about what it means to be test optional, or what it means to apply without your scores. And I think it's always a negative connotation. I think people assume that if you don't submit your test scores, that a university or an admission process is going to look negatively upon you. And I just don't think that's the case. That hasn't been my experience in the admission office that I have worked in. It is important to understand the different terminology, though, that comes along with test optional policy. So we're going to quickly go through those. So the first is the term I always use, and I think the one that people are most familiar with. So test optional. But what does that mean? Be a test optional university. So it just essentially means that students can choose whether or not they want to submit their SAT or ACT scores. If they don't submit the scores, it's not a part of the application. The person reviewing your application does not see the SAT and SAT scores is not factored into the scholarship decision or the admission decision. And in some cases, and we'll talk about this, this is definitely the case within over Bryant University, a student may be required to submit a portfolio or a project or an additional essay in place of the SAT. The next term you might hear is test flexible. This is something I don't have as much experience with, but there are some colleges and universities that have a test flexible policy. What that really means is that you're using other tests from other curriculums in place of the SAT or the ACT scores. So for some schools, it might be IB or a national curriculum from the country that you're or A levels, or a variety of different exams that are offered in curriculums from around the world. And colleges and universities, their admission process will use these exam scores in place of the SAT or ACT. That essentially is what the test flexible policy means. The last term is test blind. And if you're applying to a test blind institution, it's important to know that even if you submit the SAT or ACT scores to this type of institution, they're not gonna factor it in. They're still not going to look to it either if you submit, if they're great scores, if they're poor scores. If you don't submit it, it's really not going to make a difference in any way. And we'll talk about pairing some institutions and policies later in the presentation. You'll see a little bit more of what that means. Now, you could apply to a test blind school that maybe doesn't consider test scores if your GPA is over a certain amount. So certain schools will have different policies around the test blind. You might have to meet certain criteria for that and be in a certain range in terms of your grades. Um, this is just a collection of some of the questions I will get from uh, college from students that are going through the process. And just kind of want to walk through some of those. So the first and foremost is how should I decide if I should or shouldn't submit a test score? And the most general and easiest way to answer that question is you should submit your SAT or ACT score if you believe it is a good reflection of your ability as a student. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have a 1250 on the SAT. That 1250 on the SAT doesn't always mean the same thing for every student. If you're a 4.0 GPA student, or if you're a student that has a 40 on an IB curriculum, or you're maxing out or getting some of the highest percentages on your exams, that 1250 might not be as good of a reflection of your academic abilities. You might want us to focus a little bit more on your grades. But if you're just an kind of average student right in the middle of an academic profile, that 1250 might be a better representation of your ability as a student. So I would pay attention to the averages or the middle 50% range for the colleges and universities that you're applying to. But at the end of the day, you want to submit your test scores if they're a good reflection of who you are as a student, if they help support your grades and the performance you've had throughout high school. Um, so you'll also see some universities, they might have test optional policy or test flexible or test blind policies, but for certain programs, they might require test scores. So I get a question a lot, are there specific programs of the university that require test scores, but others that don't? So for at Bryant University, we don't require test scores for any of our academic programs. You're either admitted to the university or you're not. For a previous institution I worked at, we had a nursing program, and that nursing program was the only program of the school that would require SAT or ACT scores. And again, with COVID and the pandemic, they've even adjusted that policy this year. But it's important to know, in some cases, if you're applying directly to a nursing program or maybe an engineering program, they might require test scores for those programs, where other programs the university don't require test scores. So then the next question: if I don't submit a score, do I need to submit something else? And of course, with admission policies in the U.S., it really varies from school to school. Previous institution and some of my other colleagues work for schools that they don't require anything in place of the SAT or the ACT. At Bryant University, if you apply without your SAT or ACT scores, we ask you to write a test optional essay response, right? So this is a specific question from Bryant University that we're asking you. It's an additional essay on top of your common application. And we are reading that, grading that, and evaluating it as part of our application review. It does impact the admission decision. It does impact the scholarship decision. But whether you write that test optional essay or whether you submit the SAT, ACT score, you have the same chance of admission and at scholarship. Another question is, can I self-report scores? This is becoming more and more popular. Many more schools are allowing the ability to self-report the SAT or ACT scores. It does provide some nice flexibility. Of course, once you enroll in that institution, you will have to get your official results to the school. So at Bryant, we don't require, we don't accept self-report scores, but of course we can accept those from counselors if they're emailed to us. But I have several colleagues at schools that they've recently changed accepting self-reported test scores. Although in this case, with the pandemic and things, we have allowed self-reported test scores in special circumstances, of course, to follow up with the official scores after the point. And does a score impact a scholarship? Again, for a colleague of mine that works at a pretty selective university in the Northeast, they have the policy that whether you submit, it doesn't matter what your test score is, right? It won't impact your scholarship. They're using the other pieces of the application to evaluate you for scholarship. At Bryant University, once you decide to submit that SAT or ACT score, it does get factored into the scholarship. So if you submit a really strong SAT score, it's probably going to help your scholarship. If you submit a below average or poor SAT score, it's probably going to negatively impact your scholarship. But again, if you choose to apply test optional, the SAT or ACT is not factored into the scholarship decision. It's really just one way or the other. And then a lot of students are asking, I'm currently a sophomore or a junior. A lot of schools throughout the COVID pandemic this year made the move to test optional admission policies. Is it going to be the same for when I apply? And this is an awful answer, but it really just depends. You're going to have to check with each institution, each admission policy. My guess is that you'll see a lot of schools that will continue to move forward with the test optional policy, but there will be also other institutions and universities that found it was very hard to evaluate students without the test scores and switch back to requiring a test optional policy. So the best thing you can do around this question is, as you're going into the application process, is to check with the individual admission offices of the schools that you're applying for exactly what their policy is going to be for the upcoming year. And then the last question is the most important, and it really speaks to the heart of the test optional policy and why I kind of believe in this strategy for admission review so much. So the question students always ask, if you don't have my score, how do you know that I'm going to be a good candidate for the university? And I will always tell students that grades, right, your performance in the classroom, the results you received, the trajectory of your grades. Are they going up? Or are they going down? And the curriculum you selected and your performance there is going to be the best indicator of your ability to be successful at a university level. And at the end of the day, that's my job and all of our colleagues' job is just to decide, you as an individual student, can you be successful on our campus academically? Because we don't set you up for failure, but we want to admit students that can be successful at a university. So we have your grades, we have your essay, we have your activities, what you've been involved in outside the classroom, your letters of recommendation, what the people in your life say about you and say about your ability and your potential. Bryant University, we offer optional interviews. We pay attention for students that are expressing interest in the university. There you can connect with an officer. Anytime a student sends me a resume or an additional project, I will always attach that to the application. So there is plenty of information without an exam that you're taking over a 4-hour period to make a decision on whether you have the potential to be successful at our university. Again, if you do really well on the SAT or the ACT scores, right, that's one more piece of information that helps support your application, but it's not going to define your entire ability for success in the future. I heard a great stat from one of our staff members that works in first-year student support, and she actually has done a lot of research into supporting university-level students. And she said that actually your ability to organize and to manage your time will actually be a better indicator of your success or your ability to be successful at a university level above all other factors, which I thought was really interesting. So if you're thinking about building some of those skill sets, that's a good thing to start about. And then going a little long, I want to make sure we have time for questions, but this is the last slide here. So I just want to show you how from school to school this can vary, right? So you see on the right side a lot about Bryant's test optional policy. We've been test optional for 7 years. It's test optional for every student, doesn't matter the program. We do require that test optional essay in place of the SAT, ACT if you decide to weight your scores. We don't allow you to self-report, but counselor can email the test scores. Students are eligible for the same merit scholarship, but if the test scores are submitted, it'll factor in, and if not, we factor in that additional test optional essay and scholarship decision. And I want to show that compared to a colleague of mine, an example university. If you look at their school, they've been test optional for 10 years. You can see that they have the specific nursing program and the physician assisted dual degree program that they require test scores for those programs, but they are they allow students to apply test optional for all their other programs. They don't require anything in place of the SAT, ACT, so you can just wait those and you don't have to put anything else in your application. They do require self-reported SAT scores or ACT scores, but the TOEFL or the IELTS would need official scores, and counselors can email either of those. And then the test scores have no impact on scholarship. So even if you're submitting SAT, ACT scores, it's not going to change your scholarship level. So you can see two universities in the Northeast of the United States both have test optional policies. You can see how with even comparing those two schools, there's variances in the test optional policies. So I guess my point there is it's good to always communicate with the admission offices and see what you need. I apologize, I went a little bit longer than I thought, but let me see if I can get a few questions here. You'd like to see test blind again? I'll go back to this test blind policy here. So just, the university doesn't consider SAT or ACT scores in the application review. If the student submits them, the policy may not apply to all applicants to the university, right? So if there's certain programs or if you need a certain GPA to apply test blind, that's where it can vary a little bit there. So I hope that gives you a good overview as well. Quickly, we'll see in the chat. In case you have any further questions, you can, please feel free to visit me at table 14. I know we're running out of time here. I apologize for not getting to more questions, but please stop by. I appreciate you being here today. I hope this overview of the test optional policies was helpful. And I'll go over at table 12 just a little bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks, everyone.